Let me ask you something honest. When was the last time you felt truly free? Not just happy for a weekend, not just relaxed on a vacation, but genuinely, deeply free? Free from the anxiety of checking your bank account. Free from the quiet dread that shows up every time a bill arrives. Free from the exhausting performance of looking successful while secretly wondering if you can afford next month. Most people never feel that freedom. Not because they are lazy, not because they are unlucky, but because nobody ever sat them down and told them the truth about money. Not the motivational poster version, not the just believe in yourself version. The real, uncomfortable, practical truth. You probably noticed in your life that the people who talk the loudest about money rarely have the most of it. And the people who quietly build real wealth almost never talk about it at all. There is a reason for that. Real financial freedom does not look like what you see on social media. It does not look like a sports car in a rented driveway. It does not look like a business class seat posted to Instagram. It looks like a Tuesday morning where you wake up without an alarm, make your coffee slowly, and feel absolutely nothing pulling at you with urgency or fear. That is what this book is about. Not how to get rich quick. Not how to hustle 20 hours a day until your body breaks down. This book is about rules, simple, tested, deeply human rules that researchers and financial experts have studied for decades. Rules that the wealthiest, most financially free people on this planet follow quietly, consistently, and almost without thinking. Rules that nobody taught you in school. Rules that most of your friends and family do not know. Rules that, once you understand them, you cannot unlearn. And once you apply them, you cannot unexperience. Now here is something important to understand before we begin. This book does not promise you a number. It does not say, follow these rules and you will have $10 million. Because financial freedom is not the same number for everyone. For one person, freedom is retiring at 40. For another, it is simply having 3 months of expenses saved so that if something goes wrong, life does not collapse completely. The number is different, but the rules, the principles, the psychological shifts required to get there, those are universal. Many researchers and psychologists believe that our relationship with money is formed before we are even 10 years old. The habits, the fears, the beliefs, all of them are quietly installed in us by watching our parents, our communities, our culture. And most of us, without ever choosing it, inherited a broken relationship with money. We learn to spend to feel good. We learn to borrow to appear successful. We learned that talking about money is rude. We learned that wanting more is greedy. We learned that financial struggle is just part of life. But here is the truth. It does not have to be. The rules in this book are not complicated. They are not academic. They do not require a finance degree or a wealthy family or a genius-level intellect. They require something much simpler and much harder. They require honesty. Honesty about where you are, what you want, and what habits are quietly destroying your future while you scroll through your phone at night. So let us begin. Not with motivation, not with hype, with the first rule. The one that changes how you see everything. Chapter 1. Financial freedom is not a dream. It is a number. Most people treat financial freedom like a feeling, like something foggy and distant that might show up one day if life goes well enough. They say things like, I just want to be comfortable, or I just want to not worry about money. And while those feelings are completely understandable, feelings are not targets. You cannot aim at a feeling. You cannot measure a feeling. You cannot build a plan around a feeling. Financial freedom is not a feeling. It is a number. And the moment you understand this, everything changes. Here is the number. Take whatever you spend in a year, every bill, every grocery trip, every meal, every subscription, every small purchase, add it all up. That is your annual expense. Now multiply that number by 25. That result is your financial freedom number. That is the exact amount of money sitting in invested assets that would allow you to live without ever working again. Not because you would stop working. Many people never stop working once they are free, but because you would never have to work again. Every dollar you spent would come from the returns your investments generate. The principle stays. The interest pays your life. This concept has a name. Researchers and financial planners call it the 4% rule. It comes from a landmark study done in the 1990s by a financial planner named William Bengen. He spent years studying how long retirement savings would last across different market conditions in history. What he found was that if you withdraw 4% of your invested portfolio each year, your money would last at least 30 years in virtually every historical scenario he tested. Later, the Trinity study by 3 finance professors at Trinity University confirmed and expanded his findings, and the 4% rule became one of the most widely accepted principles in personal finance. So what does 4% mean in practical terms? It means that if your yearly expenses are 40,000 units of currency, your freedom number is 1 million. If your yearly expenses are 20,000 units, your freedom number is 500,000. If your yearly expenses are 80,000, your number is 2 million. The number scales directly with how you live. You probably noticed in your life that most people can roughly estimate what they earn, but very few can tell you precisely what they spend. That gap in awareness is exactly where financial confusion lives. When you do not know your annual expenses, you cannot calculate your freedom number. When you cannot calculate your freedom number, you are walking in complete darkness toward a destination you have never defined. Real-life example. Imagine 2 people, both around 30 years old. One earns an impressive salary but spends freely, takes expensive holidays, drives a car with a large monthly payment, upgrades their phone every year, and eats at restaurants most nights. Their annual expenses are somewhere around 60,000. Their freedom number is 1.5 million. The other person earns a more modest salary but has spent years tracking expenses, cutting the things that do not actually bring joy, and investing the difference. Their annual expenses sit at 22,000. Their freedom number is 550,000. The same number of years of disciplined saving could look completely different in outcomes for these 2 people, not because of income, but because of the number they are aiming at. Many financial experts believe that one of the greatest psychological gifts you can give yourself is converting your vague financial anxiety into a specific target. Anxiety feeds on uncertainty. It grows in the dark. The moment you write down your freedom number, something shifts. The goal becomes real. The path becomes visible. And the progress you make each month becomes measurable and motivating in a way that no general aspiration ever could be. Here is another way to think about this. Imagine you are running a race. For years, you have been running with no finish line in sight. You are tired, unsure how much further you need to go, and every mile feels identical to the last. Now someone paints a finish line on the road exactly 2 miles ahead. Suddenly, you know your pace. You know your energy. You know whether you are ahead of schedule or behind. The run does not get physically easier, but it becomes something your brain can actually work with. A known distance to a known destination. That is what your freedom number does. It turns the race into something you can run intelligently. Write it down. Sit tonight, add up what you actually spend in a year, and multiply by 25. Whatever that number is, do not judge it. Do not feel discouraged by it. Just know it. Own it. Put it somewhere you see it, because that is the first act of treating your financial future seriously. Not a vision board, not a motivational quote. A number. Your number. Chapter 2. Every rupee you spend costs you 25. Now that you have your freedom number, the second rule builds directly on it. And once this rule settles into your thinking, you will never look at a purchase the same way again. Every single unit of currency that you choose to spend on an ongoing lifestyle expense does not cost you just that 1 unit. It costs you 25. Because to permanently support that expense, to cover it forever without working, you would need 25 times that amount invested and generating returns. That is the true cost of a lifestyle expense. Let us make this concrete. Say you have a subscription to a streaming service that costs 100 units per month. Over a year, that is 1,200 units. To permanently support that subscription through investment returns without ever touching the principal, you would need 30,000 units invested. 100 units per month, 1,200 per year, times 25 equals 30,000. That is the real cost of a streaming service you might barely use. Now apply that thinking to larger expenses. A car with a monthly payment of 500 units, that is 6,000 per year. To permanently support that car payment, you need 150,000 units invested. A restaurant habit that costs 300 units per month. That is 3,600 per year. The permanent support cost is 90,000 units. You probably noticed in your life that small recurring expenses feel harmless because each individual payment is small. A subscription here, a premium upgrade there, a habit of buying coffee from expensive cafes. None of these feel significant in the moment, but they are all quietly adding to your freedom number, pushing it higher and higher, making it harder and harder to reach. Because every lifestyle dollar you add is $25 of freedom you need to earn. Research in behavioral economics, particularly from scholars like Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize for his work in this field, shows that humans are extraordinarily bad at visualizing the compounding and multiplicative effects of small recurring decisions. Our brains are wired to evaluate costs in isolation. We see the 100 units this month and we compare it to our paycheck and it seems trivial. We do not naturally visualize the 30,000 units it actually costs in terms of the wealth we need to accumulate. This is not an argument never to spend money. That would be a miserable, joyless way to live, and it is also completely unsustainable. This is an argument to be fully honest about the real cost of every recurring lifestyle choice. When you upgrade your apartment to something that costs an extra 500 units per month, you are not just adding 500 units to your monthly budget. You are adding 150,000 units to your freedom number. When you choose to cook at home 3 more nights per week, saving even 150 units per month, you are not just saving 1,800 per year. You are cutting 37,500 units off your freedom number. Real-life example. There is a well-known story in financial independence circles about a marketing professional who spent years wondering why, despite earning a solid income, she never seemed to get ahead. A financial coach sat with her and mapped out every recurring expense in her life against the 25 times multiplier. By the end of the session, she had a list of lifestyle expenses whose permanent support cost added up to over 3 million units. She was essentially trying to reach freedom while dragging 3 million units worth of deadweight behind her. Cutting just 4 subscriptions she barely used, and downgrading her car removed over 500,000 from her freedom number. She did not earn more. She simply understood the real cost of what she was already spending. The flip side of this rule is the most powerful part. Every unit of currency you save, every expense you cut from your lifestyle, reduces your freedom number by 25. If you cut 500 units per month in recurring expenses, you reduce your freedom number by 150,000. That is not just savings. That is not just discipline. That is progress directly toward the finish line. Real, measurable, mathematical progress. 500 units saved is the equivalent of finding 150,000 units in wealth you did not have to earn. Many financial psychologists believe that the 25 times framing is one of the most effective tools for changing spending behavior because it makes the future cost of present choices visible. We are far more careful with money when we can see the full picture. And the full picture is this. Every unnecessary recurring expense you carry is a 25 times heavier weight on your path to freedom than it appears to be. Chapter 3. Wealth is a gap, not a number on your paycheck. Let us talk about a myth that quietly ruins millions of financial lives. The myth is this: that the people who earn the most are the richest. It sounds obviously true, but it is not. It is one of the most damaging misconceptions about wealth that exists in popular culture. And once you truly understand why it is wrong, you will stop measuring financial success by income and start measuring it by something far more meaningful. Wealth is not what you earn. Wealth is what you keep. More precisely, wealth is the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Here is a concrete illustration. Person A earns 200,000 units per year. They drive a luxury car with an 800-unit monthly payment. They live in an upscale apartment. They vacation in business class. They wear status clothing, attend expensive social events, and upgrade their technology the moment a new version appears. Their annual expenses are 190,000 units. Their gap, the real wealth they actually build each year, is 10,000 units. Person B earns 70,000 units per year. They drive a reliable used car with no payment. They live in a comfortable but modest home. They take one vacation a year, always hunting for value in the booking. They invest in experiences that matter to them personally and cut deeply on the things that do not. Their annual expenses are 30,000 units. Their gap, the real wealth they build each year, is 40,000 units. Who is richer? By income, person A. By wealth building, person B is generating 4 times the actual financial progress, despite earning less than half as much. And compounded over 10, 20, 30 years, person B's financial life looks nothing like their income would suggest. While person A, despite their impressive salary, is one job loss or medical emergency away from financial collapse. Research shows that this pattern is far more common than most people suspect. A landmark book by Thomas Stanley and William Danko, titled The Millionaire Next Door, studied thousands of actual millionaires in America and found that the majority of them lived in ordinary neighborhoods, drove ordinary cars, wore ordinary clothes, and built wealth quietly through a relentlessly high gap between income and expenses. The flashy, visible displays of wealth, they found, were disproportionately concentrated among people who looked wealthy but had very little actual net worth. The people who truly had wealth were busy protecting the gap, not spending it on appearances. You probably noticed in your life that there is always some person in your community, maybe a neighbor, a relative, or a coworker, who earns a lot by every external measure but somehow never seems to be in a stable place financially. There is always a crisis, always a reason to borrow, always a next raise or bonus that will finally fix everything. And there is probably also someone, maybe harder to notice because they are quieter about money, who earns a normal amount but somehow seems settled, calm, and unbothered by financial turbulence. The difference is almost never income. It is the gap. Many economists and financial psychologists believe that lifestyle inflation, the automatic tendency to increase spending as income rises, is the single greatest destroyer of wealth among high earners. When you get a raise, the natural, cultural, socially reinforced impulse is to upgrade something. A bigger apartment, a nicer car, more expensive dinners. The raise becomes visible in your lifestyle, but not in your wealth. You earn more and somehow always arrive at the end of the month with the same thin margin you had before the raise existed. Protecting the gap requires a very different mindset. It requires the ability to let income rise while keeping expenses relatively stable. Not perfectly stable, life changes and some increases are both reasonable and necessary, but stable in the sense that increases are deliberate, evaluated, and chosen based on genuine value to your life, rather than automatic, reflexive, and chosen based on social pressure or the simple fact that you now have more money coming in. Real-life example. Warren Buffett, one of the most studied investors in history, still lives in the same house in Omaha, Nebraska that he bought in 1958 for $31,500. He has driven modest cars throughout most of his life and is famously known for eating at McDonald's most mornings. He is, by virtually every measure, one of the wealthiest humans to have ever lived. And yet his personal spending would not raise an eyebrow in a middle-class neighborhood. The gap for him has been extraordinarily wide for an extraordinarily long time. And the results of that gap, compounded across decades, speak for themselves in ways that no salary figure could ever match. Your income is something you negotiate with an employer or build through a business, but your gap, that is something only you control every single day, through the thousands of small and large decisions that determine where your money goes. Guard the gap. Chapter 4. Before you invest a single unit, do these 3 things. Here is where many people's financial journey breaks down before it ever properly begins. They read something about investing, they get excited, they open a brokerage account or a mutual fund account, they start putting money in, and then 6 months later, something goes wrong in life. A medical bill, a job loss, a car repair, a family emergency. And suddenly, with no other option, they pull their money out of their investments, often at a loss, often with penalties, and find themselves back where they started, or worse. Investing is powerful, but investing on an unstable foundation is like building a house on sand. The structure looks impressive until the ground shifts, and then it all comes down at once. Before you invest a single unit of currency, there are 3 things that must be in place. Not should be in place. Must be. The first is an emergency fund. This is money set aside in a safe, accessible account, not invested, not locked away, simply sitting there, earning modest interest at best. The purpose of this money is one thing: to handle unexpected emergencies without disrupting the rest of your financial life. Most financial advisors and researchers recommend 3 to 6 months of living expenses as the minimum emergency fund. This means if your monthly expenses are 2,000 units, your emergency fund should contain between 6,000 and 12,000 units before you invest a single unit elsewhere. Why is this so critical? Because life will, without exception, present you with unexpected financial shocks. Research by the Urban Institute found that nearly half of all American adults have experienced a financial hardship so significant in a given year that it disrupted their daily lives. A major medical expense, an unplanned car repair, a sudden job loss, a family member who needed financial help. Without an emergency fund, these events do not just cause stress, they cause a cascade. You drain your investments, you accumulate debt, you lose the compound growth that was quietly building in your favor. You start over. And starting over at 40 is categorically different from starting over at 25. The second thing that must be in place before investing is the elimination of high-interest debt. If you carry high-interest debt, particularly credit card debt, which in many countries charges interest rates between 18 and 30% annually, paying that debt off first is mathematically the highest returning investment you can make. There is no stock, no mutual fund, no real estate deal in the world that reliably returns 22% per year. Paying off a credit card charging 22% interest is the equivalent of earning a guaranteed 22% return on your money. That is a better deal than virtually any investment on the planet. Many financial experts believe that the emotionally difficult truth here is that people often keep high-interest debt while simultaneously investing because investing feels productive and growth-oriented, while paying off debt feels merely corrective. We want to be doing something exciting, building wealth, not just cleaning up a mess. But the math does not care about our feelings. High-interest debt is a hole in the bottom of your bucket. Every unit you pour in at the top flows out through the bottom faster than it accumulates. Seal the hole first. The third thing is a 6-month income backup, which is slightly different from an emergency fund. While an emergency fund covers unexpected expenses, an income backup covers the possibility of losing your income source entirely. If you are employed and you lose your job, how long can you sustain your life without panic, without desperate decisions, without accepting the first offer that comes along regardless of whether it is right for you? 6 months of income backup gives you that runway. It gives you the psychological and practical freedom to make good decisions rather than desperate ones when your income is disrupted. Real-life example. A software developer in his early 30s had been diligently investing for 2 years. He had built up what he considered a solid portfolio. Then the company he worked for downsized, and he was laid off unexpectedly. With no emergency fund and no income backup, he was forced to sell his investments at a point in the market cycle where they had temporarily declined in value. He locked in losses that took him years to recover from, not just financially, but emotionally. He had been doing the right thing, investing, but without the foundation, the right thing became the wrong sequence. The order matters. Foundation first. Build the emergency fund. Eliminate high-interest debt. Establish your 6-month income backup. Then, and only then, does investing become a process that can actually compound in your favor without being constantly disrupted by the inevitable turbulence of real life. Think of these 3 things not as obstacles to investing, but as the launching pad. Every unit of currency you direct toward these 3 areas is a unit that makes your entire financial future more stable, more resilient, and more capable of actually delivering the freedom you are aiming for. Chapter 5. Your lifestyle might be your biggest prison. This chapter is going to be uncomfortable for some people. Not because it is harsh or critical of how people choose to live, but because it will ask you to look honestly at something that most of us have been taught to admire without question. Lifestyle. Somewhere along the way in most modern cultures, the visible appearance of wealth became more culturally valuable than actual wealth. Having an expensive car became more important than owning the car outright. Living in an upscale neighborhood became more important than being financially secure within that neighborhood. Wearing certain brands, eating at certain restaurants, traveling in certain ways, all of it became currency in a social economy where the game is looking successful rather than being free. And here is the cruelest part of that game. The more you play it, the further away you move from actual freedom. Every large monthly payment you add to your life narrows your choices. Every financial obligation you take on because it looks good, rather than because it brings genuine value, adds another bar to a cage you are building around yourself. You earn more and you feel less free, not despite your lifestyle expenses, because of them. Psychologists call this phenomenon the hedonic treadmill. Research consistently shows that humans adapt quickly and almost completely to improvements in material circumstances. The excitement of a new car fades within weeks, sometimes days. The satisfaction of a luxury apartment becomes the new normal almost immediately. The positive emotional effect of an expensive purchase is temporary, but the financial obligation attached to it is not temporary. The payment continues long after the pleasure has evaporated. Many researchers, including Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, believe that beyond a certain income level, increases in material consumption produce almost no meaningful increase in daily emotional well-being. What people actually experience as life satisfaction is far more connected to factors like autonomy, meaningful work, strong relationships, and freedom from chronic stress. And chronic financial stress, the kind that comes from carrying obligations you cannot comfortably afford, is one of the most pervasive and destructive forces in modern human life. You probably noticed in your life that the person driving the nicest car in your social circle is not necessarily the most at peace. And the person who seems to carry the least financial anxiety is not necessarily the highest earner. The gap between what people look like financially and what they actually experience internally can be enormous. Real-life example. There is a concept in financial independence communities called lifestyle creep, and almost every person who has worked with a financial advisor has a version of this story. A couple earns a combined income that puts them comfortably above average. Over 10 years, as income grew, they made consistent, seemingly reasonable upgrades. A bigger house, a newer car each time the previous one hit a certain mileage, a private school for the children, a vacation rental tradition, memberships in clubs they rarely used. None of these decisions were individually catastrophic. Together, they had created a monthly obligation structure so large that the couple, earning more than 90% of people they knew, had less than 2 months of runway if either income stopped. They were not living large, they were trapped. And the trap was made entirely of choices that seemed normal, even admirable, from the outside. This is not a call for deprivation. Enjoying life is important. Spending money on things that genuinely matter to you, that create real experiences and real memories and real joy, that is what money is for. But there is a critical difference between intentional spending on what genuinely matters and reflexive spending on what looks impressive to others. Ask yourself, for each major expense in your life, does this bring me genuine, lasting satisfaction? Or does it primarily serve to signal something to other people? Is this expense something I would choose if nobody would ever see it? If the honest answer is that it is primarily about appearance, about maintaining a status, about fitting a social expectation rather than creating real value in your life, then that expense is not serving you. It is owning you. Freedom requires traveling light. The lighter your financial life, the fewer obligations pulling at you, the more choices you have at every turn. And choices are freedom. The ability to say yes because you want to, and no because you want to, without a mountain of financial obligations deciding for you, that is what financial freedom actually feels like from the inside, not a number in an account. The feeling of having genuine options. Chapter 6. Protect first. Multiply second. There is a natural human tendency to focus on upside, on gains, on growth, on the exciting possibilities of what money can become. And while that orientation is not wrong, it is incomplete. And when it is not balanced with an equal or greater focus on the downside, on losses, on what can go wrong and how to prevent it, it leads people into decisions that are far more damaging than they realize. Research in behavioral economics has consistently shown that financial losses hurt people psychologically approximately twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. This is called loss aversion, and it was documented extensively by Kahneman and his research partner Amos Tversky through decades of research. Losing 1,000 units feels roughly twice as bad as winning 1,000 units feels good. The pain is asymmetric. And yet, most people in their financial decision-making pay far more attention to potential gains than to potential losses. Successful people, the ones who build and maintain wealth across decades rather than building it and losing it in cycles, tend to operate from the opposite instinct. They are obsessively focused on what can go wrong, not out of pessimism, but out of discipline. They ask, before making any financial decision, what is the worst realistic outcome? Can I survive it? Is the potential upside worth the realistic downside? Many experienced investors and financial researchers believe that in the early stages of wealth building, protecting what you have matters more than growing it aggressively. Because early losses are disproportionately damaging. When you have very little, losing a significant portion of it sets you back not just financially, but psychologically. The damage to confidence, motivation, and discipline from an early major financial loss can be more costly in the long run than the financial loss itself. 3 specific behaviors destroy wealth with quiet consistency, and they are worth naming clearly. The first is lifestyle inflation, which we discussed in the previous chapter. Every time income rises and lifestyle rises to match, the gap narrows or disappears, and wealth building stops. Lifestyle inflation is the most common and most invisible wealth destroyer operating in the lives of high-income people. The second behavior is impulsive buying. Research shows that a significant proportion of purchases, some studies suggest as much as 40 to 60% of retail purchases, are unplanned decisions made in the moment based on emotion rather than deliberate need. Impulsive buying is driven by triggers, stress, boredom, social comparison, marketing, and the temporary emotional boost that comes from acquiring something new. The problem is that the financial damage from impulsive buying is real and permanent, while the emotional relief it provides is brief and shallow. Every impulsive purchase is a unit removed from your gap, a unit that could have been working toward freedom. The third behavior is spending to impress people. This is so deeply woven into human social behavior that many people do not even recognize it as a financial choice. It is just how life works, they think. You buy things at a certain level to signal belonging, status, and competence. But many psychologists who study social behavior note that the people you are trying to impress are, more often than not, too busy managing their own impression to notice yours in the way you imagine. And the people whose respect is actually worth having tend to be most impressed not by displays of wealth, but by evidence of competence, integrity, and genuine achievement. The investors and business people who consistently maintain wealth across long time periods are not typically the most aggressive. They are not necessarily the smartest, but they are almost universally excellent at one specific thing: avoiding catastrophic mistakes. They protect capital fiercely. They do not take risks they do not understand. They do not chase trends with money they cannot afford to lose. They do not let good years make them arrogant about bad years being impossible. Real-life example. Countless studies of lottery winners document a disturbing pattern. A significant percentage of people who win large lottery sums, far more than most people expect, end up financially worse off within a few years than they were before winning. The money arrives suddenly, without the foundational discipline required to protect it, and the combination of impulsive spending, generous gifts to everyone who asks, unwise investments made in excitement rather than wisdom, and the social pressure that comes with sudden visible wealth erodes the sum faster than most people believe possible. The money was real. The skill to protect it was absent, and absent that skill, even genuine windfalls can become net negatives. Protect your money. Protect your gap. Say no to lifestyle expenses that do not genuinely matter. Create a pause between impulse and purchase. Stop playing the social status game with your financial future. The people who build real, lasting wealth do not primarily do so by finding magical investments that outperform the market. They do it by being deeply, consistently disciplined about protecting what they earn. Then, once the foundation is solid and the discipline is established, they grow it. But protection comes first. Chapter 7. Do not diversify too early. Become a monster at one thing. You have almost certainly heard the advice, do not put all your eggs in one basket. It is traditional wisdom. It sounds safe and sensible. It is also, in certain contexts and at certain stages of wealth building, completely wrong. Diversification is a powerful strategy, but it is powerful at a specific stage, specifically when you have already accumulated significant wealth and the primary goal shifts from building to preserving. Before that stage, premature diversification is not protection. It is distraction. It is the financial equivalent of trying to fill 5 buckets simultaneously when you only have enough water to fill one. Think about it this way. Every financial domain, whether that is stock market investing, real estate, building a business, trading, or any other vehicle for wealth creation, is a deeply complex field. Each one has its own language, its own psychology, its own set of skills, and its own learning curve. To operate at a level where you generate strong, consistent returns in any of these areas, you need real knowledge, accumulated experience, and the pattern recognition that only comes from sustained, focused attention over time. When you scatter your attention and resources across multiple domains simultaneously, you prevent yourself from developing deep competence in any of them. You remain a beginner in 5 arenas instead of becoming expert in one. And beginners in financial markets have a well-documented tendency to lose money. They make decisions based on incomplete information. They are easily influenced by noise. They panic at the first sign of volatility. They do not understand what they own well enough to know when a setback is temporary and when it is genuinely alarming. Many successful investors and business builders believe that early-stage wealth creation is almost always driven by concentrated focus. You pick the vehicle that best fits your temperament, your existing knowledge base, your available time, and your risk tolerance. And then you learn it deeply. You spend time in it. You make early mistakes that are educational rather than catastrophic because you are paying attention to what went wrong and why. You develop intuition. You build a mental model of how value is created and destroyed in that specific domain. And over time, that deep competence starts to generate returns that the scattered generalist never achieves. Real-life example. Consider someone who wants to build wealth through real estate. In the early years, they focus entirely on a specific type of property in a specific geographic area. They learn everything about that market. They understand what drives values up and down. They know the rental demand patterns. They know the neighborhoods. They develop relationships with agents, contractors, and lenders who trust them because they show up consistently. Within 5 years, they have developed expertise that allows them to identify good deals faster, execute with more confidence, and manage properties more effectively than almost anyone entering that market fresh. Their returns reflect that expertise. Then, once they have real wealth built in this single domain, they begin selectively diversifying into other areas from a position of strength rather than ignorance. Contrast that with the person who, at the same starting point, spends year 1 in stocks, year 2 in real estate, year 3 in cryptocurrency, year 4 trying to build a side business, and year 5 in commodities. At the end of 5 years, they have dabbled in everything and mastered nothing. They have learned just enough in each area to feel confused, made mistakes in each area they do not fully understand, and built almost nothing in any of them because they never developed the depth required to operate beyond the beginner level. This principle applies not just to investments but to income building as well. Early career people who develop one highly valuable skill, one domain of genuine expertise that the market rewards, almost always outperform those who try to be competent at many things simultaneously. Depth creates leverage. Depth creates opportunities. Depth creates the kind of reputation that attracts better deals, better clients, and better outcomes. Breadth, in the early stages, creates the illusion of optionality while actually limiting it. There is a time for diversification. That time is when you have already built something real in one domain, when you have genuine expertise and genuine assets. Then diversification is sensible risk management. Before that, it is usually just a sophisticated-sounding way of not committing to anything long enough to become good at it. Pick your lane, become exceptional in it, let the results accumulate. Then from that position of earned strength, expand. Chapter 8. Your income is not the problem. Your speed is. Let us be direct about something that many financial books dance around carefully because it is uncomfortable. For some people, at some stages of their journey, the gap is genuinely small, not primarily because expenses are too high, but because income is too low. And in that situation, the path forward requires something specific and urgent that no amount of expense optimization can replace. If you currently earn very little, and your expenses are already minimal, and you still cannot generate a meaningful gap, the honest answer is that you need to increase your income. Not someday, not eventually. Now, with the same intensity and focus that a person brings to any other genuine crisis. Because financially speaking, that is exactly what it is. The good news is that income is not fixed. It is not a destiny. It is not determined at birth. Research in labor economics and career development consistently shows that income is one of the most variable and responsive elements of a person's financial life when the right actions are taken. It can change dramatically in a relatively short period through skill development, positioning, negotiation, and the willingness to do work that is genuinely hard and genuinely valuable. The bad news, and this must be said plainly, is that income growth requires a form of investment that many people are reluctant to make. Not necessarily money, though sometimes money. Time. Focused, deliberate, uncomfortable time. Learning skills that the market values highly. Putting in the hours to become genuinely good at something. Doing the work that others avoid because it is difficult or socially awkward or requires long patience before it pays off. Many economists and career researchers believe that the single most effective way to increase income in the early stages is to develop skills that are both rare and highly valued. Skills that combine genuine difficulty with genuine demand. The combination of those two factors, few people have it, many people need it, drives compensation in virtually every field and every economy. If what you offer is easy to replicate, you will earn what the market pays for easily replicated work. If what you offer is genuinely difficult to replicate, the premium can be extraordinary. You probably noticed in your life that the people who complain most about their income are often the people who have invested least in their own skills and positioning. And the people who command the highest compensation are rarely the ones who got lucky. They are almost always the ones who spent years developing something that was difficult to develop and strategically positioned themselves where that development translated into maximum reward. Real-life example. A young person working in customer service at 22 earns a modest salary that barely covers basic expenses. The gap is nearly zero. Two paths are available. One path is to optimize expenses, clip coupons, downgrade everything, and try to squeeze a tiny gap out of a tiny income. This path is noble and worth doing, but it has a ceiling. The other path is to dedicate evenings and weekends to learning a technical skill, perhaps data analysis, coding, digital marketing, or project management, that the job market rewards substantially. Within 2 to 3 years, a person who follows this path consistently can often double or triple their income. The gap that was impossible to generate at the original income level becomes not just possible, but natural. The optimization that felt futile before suddenly has room to actually work. If you are in this situation, the rule is simple, even if the execution is hard. Work aggressively on income. Not by working yourself into physical collapse, though high intensity over a finite period is often necessary, but by being strategic and deliberate. Identify the 2 or 3 skills or capabilities that would most dramatically increase your market value. Invest your available time and energy in developing those capabilities. Be patient enough to let the development reach a level where it actually commands higher compensation. And be aggressive enough to not wait for permission, to not wait for someone to notice and reward you, but to actively seek out and create the situations where your developed skills become visible and valuable. The 40-year financial struggle is real. It happens to real people. People who have potential, who are not lazy, who are not unintelligent, but who never quite build enough income to generate a meaningful gap and never quite find the time to develop the skills that would change that dynamic. Escaping that pattern requires urgency. It requires treating skill development as the investment it is. And it requires the honesty to look at your current income honestly and ask, not how do I manage this better, but how do I genuinely grow this in a meaningful way, and then doing the work that answer requires. Chapter 9. Time is the only asset you cannot earn back. Every discussion of financial freedom eventually leads to this truth. The most important variable in the equation is not how much you invest. It is not which investment you choose. It is how early you start. And the mathematics behind this truth are so dramatic, so almost unbelievable, that understanding them deeply tends to produce the kind of urgency that actually changes behavior. Compound interest, the process by which returns generate their own returns, which generate their own returns, which generate further returns, is what Albert Einstein is frequently quoted as calling the eighth wonder of the world. Whether he actually said it is debated among historians, but the sentiment behind the attribution is entirely accurate. Compounding is a force that produces results so outsized relative to the inputs that most human intuition fundamentally underestimates it. Here is an example that researchers and financial educators use often because it illustrates the point so powerfully that it tends to stay with people. Consider two people. Person A starts investing at 22 years old, contributes regularly for 10 years, and then completely stops, never adds another unit, but leaves the money invested until retirement at 65. Person B waits until 32 to start investing, and then contributes the exact same amount every single year until retirement at 65, which means they invest for 33 years compared to person A's 10 years. Who ends up with more money? In most realistic scenarios, assuming similar returns, person A, who invested for 10 years and then stopped, ends up with more money than person B, who invested for 33 years. The 10-year head start that compounding had to work with, the extra decade of exponential growth, more than compensates for the additional 23 years of contributions. This is not a theoretical curiosity. This is one of the most well-documented and practically significant findings in the entire field of personal finance. Starting earlier is worth more than contributing more, not always marginally more, often dramatically more. Many financial educators believe that if this principle were genuinely understood at age 18 or 22, the global landscape of retirement security would look fundamentally different. The tragedy is not that people cannot afford to invest. The tragedy is that most people who could afford to invest small amounts early in life do not, because the returns feel too small to matter in the short term. And by the time the power of compounding becomes viscerally obvious to them, the most valuable years are already gone. You probably noticed in your life that older adults who wish they had done something differently financially, almost universally, say the same thing when asked. They wish they had started earlier. Not that they had been smarter with their choices, not that they had picked better investments, but that they had simply started sooner. Because starting sooner is the one factor that, in hindsight, they can see would have changed everything. Real-life example. A 35-year-old sitting down with a financial planner for the first time, in good shape financially by many measures, is sometimes presented with a sobering calculation. If they had started investing just 10 years earlier, at 25 even modest regular contributions, the projected wealth at retirement would be anywhere from 2 to 4 times larger, due purely to the additional decade of compounding. The money they spent or did not save in their 20s, whatever it bought or did not buy, cost them potentially millions of units in future wealth. The transaction happened silently, invisibly, over decades, but it was real. If you are young, the single most financially valuable thing you can do right now, before reading another chapter, before making any other change, is to begin. Not perfectly, not with a large sum. Begin with whatever is available. The exact amount matters far less than the fact of beginning. Open the account. Set up the smallest automatic contribution you can manage. Start the clock. Because every year that passes before you start is a year of compounding that can never be recovered. If you are not young, or not as young as you wish you were when you read this, the instinct to feel regret is understandable but not useful. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Start now. With honesty about where you are, with realistic expectations about what is achievable given your timeline, and with the understanding that even late starts, pursued with genuine discipline, can produce outcomes dramatically better than never starting at all. Time is the one asset you cannot earn, borrow, or buy more of. You can only use what you have. And what you have right now today is more time than you will have tomorrow. Use it. Chapter 10. The Real Cost of Looking Rich. There is a game that most societies play, and most individuals within those societies play along without ever consciously choosing to participate. The game is called Looking Wealthy, and it is one of the most expensive games in the world, not because the stakes are obvious, but because they are invisible while the costs accumulate in the background of your entire financial life. Thorstein Veblen, an economist writing in the 1890s, introduced the concept of conspicuous consumption, the practice of spending money on visible goods and services primarily to signal social status rather than for any practical benefit those goods provide. He identified it as a dominant force in industrial society. More than a century later, with social media amplifying and accelerating every aspect of social comparison, conspicuous consumption has not diminished. It has intensified to a level Veblen could not have imagined. Research shows that social comparison is one of the most powerful drivers of consumer behavior. Humans are deeply wired to evaluate their own status, success, and worth relative to others. It is evolutionary, not a character flaw. For most of human history, social standing mattered for survival. Being seen as low status had real consequences. Being high status offered real protections. Those instincts have not updated to the modern reality where the financial consequences of acting on them are radically different. The ancient drive to signal status now operates in an environment where signaling it can quietly bankrupt you. Consider what the game actually costs. Many people who live in the most expensive apartment their income can technically support are doing so partly because of what their address signals. Many people who drive a car at the top of what their monthly budget can manage are doing so partly because of what the badge on the hood communicates. Many people who wear specific brands, carry specific accessories, vacation at specific locations, and dine at specific establishments are doing so partly or entirely for the social narrative those choices tell about who they are. And the cumulative cost of that social narrative, evaluated through the lens of the 25 times multiplier we discussed earlier, is almost always in the hundreds of thousands, often in the millions, of units of wealth they are sacrificing. Psychologists who study social behavior note that the painful irony of conspicuous consumption is that it rarely produces the social outcomes people are seeking. Morgan Housel, a widely respected financial writer, observes in his work that people tend to admire the wealth signaled by a luxury car, not the specific person driving it. When you drive past a beautiful car, your mind rarely generates a detailed, admiring thought about the driver. It generates a thought about what it would feel like to have that car. The admiration attaches to the object. The driver, as a specific human being, receives almost none of it. We buy status symbols to be seen, and we mostly are not seen in the way we imagine. You probably noticed in your life that the people you most genuinely admire, most deeply respect, and most want to emulate are rarely admired because of their possessions. They are admired because of who they are. Their judgment, their character, their competence, their generosity, their accomplishments. The things that are intrinsic to them rather than attached to them through purchase. Real-life example. A study conducted by researchers at the University of Michigan found that lottery winners reported being happier than controls in the immediate aftermath of winning, but returned to near baseline happiness within 1 to 2 years, while simultaneously reporting significantly higher financial stress due to having expanded their lifestyle dramatically to match their new perceived status. Many had moved to more expensive homes in neighborhoods where they felt social pressure to maintain an appearance that consumed their winnings faster than they could sustain. The wealth came and went, but the expensive social context it created remained as an ongoing obligation. The alternative to playing this game is not becoming a hermit or living with deliberate deprivation. It is something much more interesting and ultimately more satisfying. It is deciding, consciously and deliberately, what you actually value. Separating the things that genuinely bring you joy, comfort, meaning, and experience from the things that primarily serve as signals in a social performance. Spending generously on the former. Ruthlessly cutting the latter. Not to punish yourself, to free yourself, to redirect the wealth that was flowing toward appearances into the assets that create actual freedom. Looking rich and being free are, for most people at most stages of life, in direct conflict. Every unit spent performing wealth is a unit not building it. The choice, once you see it clearly, is not actually a difficult one. It is simply a matter of deciding which version of your future self you are building toward. Chapter 11. Understand the enemy inside you. Of all the forces that work against financial freedom, the most powerful, the most persistent, and the most difficult to defeat is not the market. It is not inflation. It is not bad luck. It is not even a lack of knowledge. It is the predictable, consistent, thoroughly researched ways in which the human mind makes terrible financial decisions. Behavioral economics, the field that studies how psychology affects economic decision-making, has spent the last 50 years documenting these patterns. The findings are humbling. Human beings are not the rational economic actors that classical economic theory assumed. We are deeply, systematically, predictably irrational in specific ways that tend to reduce our wealth and undermine our long-term interests. Understanding these patterns does not eliminate them. But awareness is the precondition for defense. You cannot guard against a threat you do not know exists. The first pattern is present bias. Researchers show that humans dramatically overvalue the present relative to the future. Given a choice between receiving 100 units today or 150 units in 1 year, most people choose the immediate 100, even though the math clearly favors waiting. This instinct made perfect sense in environments where tomorrow was uncertain. But in modern financial life, it leads to chronic undersaving, overborrowing, and the consistent preference for immediate consumption over future security. The second pattern is the illusion of control. Humans vastly overestimate their ability to predict and control financial outcomes. This is why people make concentrated bets on single stocks they know are going to perform well. This is why people time markets, entering when they feel confident and exiting when they feel afraid, reliably doing both at exactly the wrong moments. This is why people underestimate risk when they are in a familiar domain, believing that familiarity equals competence. The third pattern, which we touched on earlier, is loss aversion. The pain of losing is disproportionately greater than the pleasure of gaining. This leads people to hold losing investments far too long, hoping they will recover rather than cutting losses and deploying capital more effectively. It leads them to sell winning investments too early, locking in gains before they feel they can evaporate. It produces investment decisions driven by fear and hope rather than by rational analysis. Many behavioral psychologists believe that the single most financially dangerous emotional state is overconfidence during a bull market. When markets are rising and every investment appears to be working, humans tend to attribute that success to their own skill rather than to favorable market conditions. Risk tolerance expands. Position sizes grow. Diversification decreases. And when the inevitable correction comes, the exposure that seemed manageable in a rising market becomes catastrophic in a falling one. Real-life example. The dot-com bubble of the late 1990s and the financial crisis of 2008 share a common psychological signature. In both cases, rising asset prices created widespread overconfidence. People who had never analyzed a balance sheet were making investment decisions based on feelings of momentum and excitement. Stories of ordinary people making extraordinary returns circulated and created social pressure to participate. And when the correction came, the losses were not distributed evenly. They fell most heavily on those who had taken the most risk at the worst possible time, driven primarily by the psychological dynamics of a crowd in an overconfident state. How do you defend against yourself? The research points consistently toward structures and systems rather than willpower. Automate your savings so the decision is made once and then does not require continuous discipline to maintain. Create rules for investment decisions that you follow regardless of how you feel in the moment, and write them down before you need them, because the moment of temptation is a terrible time to be drafting your principles. Build in deliberate cooling-off periods before major financial decisions. If you are still convinced the decision is right after 72 hours of not thinking about it urgently, it probably is. If the urgency evaporates, the impulse probably should have as well. Study your own patterns. Look back at financial decisions you regret and ask what psychological mechanism was driving them. Were you buying to feel better emotionally? Were you selling because you were afraid? Were you holding a losing position because you could not admit you were wrong? Naming the mechanism makes it visible. Making it visible makes it something you can recognize the next time it appears. And recognition, even partial, imperfect recognition, is far better than operating on pure instinct in a domain where instinct is systematically unreliable. The enemy inside is not your enemy. It is your history. It is evolution. It is the same cognitive architecture that kept your ancestors alive in wildly different circumstances, now operating in a financial environment it was never designed for. Understanding it is not self-criticism. It is wisdom. Chapter 12. The Myth of the Perfect Moment. Let us address something that holds more people back from financial progress than almost any other single factor. The belief that there is a better time, a more right moment, a more favorable set of circumstances just around the corner, after which everything will be properly set up to begin. I will start investing when I have more income. I will start saving when the debt is paid off. I will start building when the market conditions are better. I will figure out my finances when life settles down a little. These sentences are said in complete sincerity by people who genuinely intend to act, and they are said year after year after year, while the best years for compounding pass and the freedom number grows no smaller. The perfect moment is a myth. Not because good conditions do not exist or because some moments are not genuinely better than others, but because the pursuit of perfect conditions as a prerequisite for action is almost always a form of sophisticated avoidance. The imperfect action taken today will, in the vast majority of cases, produce better outcomes than the perfect action planned indefinitely for tomorrow. Research in psychology and behavioral science shows that what is often labeled procrastination is frequently not laziness. It is often anxiety. The task feels so large, the stakes feel so high, the gap between current reality and desired outcome feels so wide that starting feels overwhelming. And so the mind generates a continuous stream of reasons why now is not quite the right moment, why a little more preparation is needed, why the conditions are not yet quite favorable enough. The reasons feel rational, but they are being generated by avoidance, not by genuine analysis. You probably noticed in your life that the things you have started imperfectly, the workout routine that began with just 10 minutes a day, the skill you began learning with a free online course while telling yourself you would get serious about it later, the savings habit you began with a comically small automatic transfer. Those imperfect beginnings sometimes turned into the most significant practices in your life. And the things you planned perfectly, researched thoroughly, prepared for extensively, but never quite started, those are the things that often do not exist at all. Many financial advisors and coaches believe that the most important financial decision a person can make is not which investment to choose or which account to open. It is simply to start. The decision to begin, even imperfectly, even with resources that feel embarrassingly small, even in market conditions that feel uncertain, is the decision that separates the people who build something from the people who plan to build something indefinitely. Real-life example. Two colleagues at the same company both learn about index fund investing at 30 years old. Person A decides to wait until they have a more significant sum to invest, feels that investing small amounts now would not make a meaningful difference, and plans to start seriously in 2 years when a certain financial situation resolves. Person B opens an account that week, sets up an automatic transfer of whatever small amount fits comfortably in the budget, and essentially forgets about it, leaving it to compound quietly. 10 years later, Person A has made some investments but with an irregular start and stop pattern that reflects years of waiting for better moments. Person B has 10 years of consistent compounding to show for a decision that took 45 minutes to implement. The amounts and returns are similar. The consistency is not. This principle extends beyond investing to every dimension of financial life. The budget you make imperfectly today, even if it is rough and incomplete and requires revision, is more valuable than the perfect budget you are going to make when you have more time to do it properly. The side income you start generating now, even if the early amounts are small and the process is awkward and learning intensive, is more valuable than the side income you are going to generate once you have figured out exactly the right approach. The emergency fund you begin building this month, even if you can only move a small amount into it, is more valuable than the fully funded emergency fund you plan to have once the finances are better organized. Start now. Imperfectly, incompletely, with whatever is available. The momentum of beginning is itself one of the most powerful financial tools available to you. And the moment of beginning is the only moment that is actually in your control. Chapter 13. The people around you are either assets or liabilities. Personal finance books rarely discuss the social dimension of financial behavior directly. It is considered impolite, perhaps, or it seems too judgmental of people's relationships to suggest that the company you keep has financial consequences. But the research is clear, and avoiding the topic because it is uncomfortable would be a disservice to anyone serious about building financial freedom. The people closest to you shape your spending behavior more powerfully than almost any other external force. Not through direct pressure, usually, though that exists too, but through something subtler and more pervasive. They define what normal looks like. They set the implicit standard for what an acceptable lifestyle is at your income level and social position. They create the social comparison context that your brain is constantly, automatically, involuntarily running in the background. Research in social psychology shows that financial behavior clusters strongly within social networks. People's savings rates, spending patterns, debt levels, and financial risk tolerance all show strong correlations with those of their close social contacts. This is not primarily because people explicitly pressure each other, though they sometimes do. It is because human beings calibrate normal behavior by observing what the people around them do. If your immediate social circle spends freely, upgrades regularly, carries debt without apparent concern, and treats financial restraint as either amusing or slightly sad, your brain will register that pattern as normal and will generate strong internal resistance to behaving differently. Many sociologists and behavioral psychologists believe that this social calibration effect is one of the most underestimated obstacles in personal financial development. You can have all the right knowledge, all the right intentions, all the right plans, and still find yourself consistently making decisions that align with the financial culture of your social circle rather than your own stated goals. Not because you are weak, but because the social pressure operating on your behavior is largely invisible and enormously powerful. Real-life example. A person who grows up in a household and community where consumer debt is normal, where lifestyle spending is celebrated, where financial restraint is associated with poverty rather than wisdom, faces a different internal challenge than someone who grew up in an environment where saving was admired, investing was discussed at the dinner table, and financial freedom was a shared value. The first person has to work against deeply embedded social programming to build the behaviors that create wealth. The second person has those behaviors as a form of cultural default. Neither is smarter or more disciplined in any absolute sense. But one is swimming with the current, and one is swimming against it. This does not mean abandoning relationships with people whose financial behaviors differ from yours. That would be both impractical and unnecessary. It means being conscious of the influence that social environment has on financial behavior and making deliberate choices to counteract it where necessary. Spending time with people who talk honestly about building wealth. Finding communities, even online ones, of people who share your financial values. Recognizing that when your social context makes a financial behavior feel strange or excessive, that might be a signal that the behavior is correct, not that it needs to be abandoned. It also means being honest with yourself about specific social pressures that are costing you money. The friend group that always wants to go to the most expensive restaurants, and where suggesting a more affordable option would feel awkward. The family gatherings where gift-giving at a certain level is a social expectation that creates real financial pressure. The colleague who always wants to upgrade a night out in ways that push the budget further than it needs to go. These pressures are real. They cost real money. And managing them requires a combination of honest internal clarity about your priorities and the social skill to navigate the situations without either destroying relationships or surrendering your financial goals. The people who build financial freedom almost always, at some point, make peace with being different from the financial normal of their environment. They stop letting the implicit social standard of their peer group determine their spending. They make financial choices based on where they are going rather than what currently looks normal in the circles they move in. And they find, often to their relief, that the people who genuinely matter, the relationships that are real and deep rather than transactional and status-based, do not actually require financial performance to remain strong. Chapter 14. Invest in the asset that never depreciates. We have talked extensively about money, how it flows, how it compounds, how it is lost, how it is protected. But there is one category of investment that almost every serious builder of long-term wealth agrees on, one that produces compounding returns in a way that is qualitatively different from any financial asset. That investment is yourself, your skills, your knowledge, your health, your relationships, your reputation, your judgment. These are the assets that generate all the other assets. Every unit of currency you will ever earn, every investment you will ever make, every gap you will ever protect traces back to capabilities that live inside you rather than in an account. And unlike financial assets, which can be lost in market crashes, stolen through fraud, or eroded by inflation, a well-developed human being is extraordinarily resilient. Setbacks that would permanently derail someone without strong underlying capabilities are temporary inconveniences for someone who has invested deeply in themselves. Warren Buffett is quoted as saying that the best investment you can ever make is in your own abilities, and that this investment cannot be taxed away or inflated away. The logic is archaipos, impeccable. If you have skills that the market values highly, your earning power is robust across different employers, economic cycles, and even different countries. If you have knowledge that gives you an edge in investment decisions, that edge compounds every time you use it. If you have the physical health and mental clarity that comes from taking care of yourself, you have the energy and judgment to execute well on everything else. Research in labor economics consistently shows that education and skill development produce some of the highest average financial returns of any investment category. Not just formal education, but deliberate, targeted skill development in areas with strong market demand. Learning a new language that opens a geographic job market. Developing technical skills that command premium compensation. Building communication and leadership capabilities that create advancement opportunities. Acquiring domain expertise that enables investment in a specific area with genuine insight. Many successful investors and entrepreneurs believe that the biggest mistake people make with money is neglecting to invest in their most important asset, themselves, while obsessing over the allocation of secondary assets like stocks and real estate. Your primary asset is your ability to earn, think, judge, and create. Everything else is downstream of that. You probably noticed in your life that the people who seem to recover from financial setbacks most quickly are not necessarily the ones who had the most money. They are the ones who had the most developed capabilities. A person with highly valued skills who loses everything in a business failure is usually rebuilt within a few years because the skills that created the first success create the second and third ones as well. A person with significant assets but underdeveloped capabilities can lose those assets and find themselves genuinely struggling to rebuild, because the foundation was always the assets rather than the person holding them. Real-life example. Studies of successful entrepreneurs who experienced significant failures, bankruptcy, business collapse, catastrophic product launches show that the ones who rebuilt most effectively and most quickly were almost uniformly the ones who had invested most heavily in developing transferable skills and knowledge. The failure took the money. It could not take the learning, the network, the judgment, or the pattern recognition that had been built through years of deliberate self-development. Those intangible assets became the foundation of the next chapter. Invest in your health with the seriousness of someone who understands that physical and cognitive function are prerequisites for everything else you want to achieve. Invest in skills that will make you more valuable over the next decade. Invest in relationships with genuinely interesting, capable, and honest people. Invest in knowledge that informs better decisions in every domain of life. These investments do not show up on a balance sheet, but they show up everywhere in the quality, the resilience, and the sustainability of the financial life you are building. Chapter 15. The Final Rule. Freedom is built in ordinary moments, not in big ones. We have reached the last chapter of this journey, and it ends not with a dramatic revelation, but with something quieter and in many ways more important than anything that came before it. Financial freedom is not built in moments of inspiration. It is not built at seminars or during the high-energy periods when everything feels possible and the plan seems clear and the motivation is running high. It is not built by the one decision you make after reading a book like this. It is built entirely in the ordinary moments. The moments when nobody is watching, the moments when the motivation has faded and habit is the only thing carrying the behavior forward. The moments when the short-term reward of a different choice is right in front of you, and the long-term reward of the disciplined choice is 40 years in the future. Research in psychology and habit formation, most comprehensively summarized in the work of researchers like Charles Duhigg and James Clear, shows that the behaviors that compound over time to create extraordinary outcomes are almost never dramatic. They are small, they are consistent, they are ordinary, and they are maintained not through relentless motivation or heroic willpower, but through systems, environments, and the gradual internalization of identity. The person who becomes financially free does not become free in a single moment. They become free through thousands of individual small decisions that consistently pointed in the same direction. The decision to invest a small amount this month. The decision to cook at home on a night when ordering felt easier. The decision not to upgrade the car when the old one still works. The decision to read something educational on a Sunday morning instead of shopping online. The decision to have an honest conversation with a partner about money rather than avoiding the discomfort. None of these decisions feel significant. Together, over years and decades, they are everything. Many psychologists who study behavior change and long-term success believe that the most important question is not what to do. Most people, after a reasonable amount of reading and reflection, know what to do. The most important question is who you are deciding to become. When financial discipline becomes part of your identity, when you think of yourself as someone who protects the gap, who builds rather than performs, who chooses freedom over appearance, the individual decisions become easier. They feel less like sacrifice and more like expression. You are not restraining yourself from spending. You are simply being who you are. Real-life example. Studies of people who have successfully achieved financial independence and retired early, a movement often called financial independence and early retirement, consistently find that the subjective experience of the journey, the years of deliberate saving and investing, is described not primarily as sacrifice but as clarity. Participants report that the process of defining what actually matters to them, cutting everything that does not, and directing resources toward freedom, produced a quality of life that was often better during the journey than it had been when spending was unrestricted. The clarity was itself a form of freedom. You probably noticed in your life that your best days are rarely the days when you spent the most. Your best days tend to be days of meaning, connection, accomplishment, and peace. Those things are available at almost any income level and almost any expense level. They are not dependent on achieving your freedom number first. They are available right now in the daily practice of the rules in this book. So this is the final rule, the one that holds all the others together. Begin now, not after the next raise, not when the debt is cleared, not when you feel ready, because ready is a feeling that is very skilled at never quite arriving. Begin now with honesty about where you are. Begin with the smallest possible action that points in the right direction. Open the account. Write down the number. Cut the first unnecessary expense. Set up the smallest automatic transfer. Do one single concrete thing today that your future self will be grateful for. And then do it again tomorrow. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just consistently. In the ordinary moments that nobody sees and nobody celebrates, where the real architecture of a free life is built, one unspectacular decision at a time. Financial freedom is not a dream. It never was. It is a number, a gap, a habit, a set of rules applied daily in the quiet, ordinary moments of a life being intentionally built. You have the rules now. You know what to do. The rest is simply showing up for it, day after day, in the beautiful, ordinary, unremarkable moments that are, without exception, where real freedom is made.